Hi there. I just want everybody to know that you are joining an Empower Hour, just so you're in the right place. Next month's webinar, we have an Empower Hour on October 11th at 6 o'clock with Mayor Aaron Brockett. And we're interested in hearing about how he and Boulder City Council are planning to lead on climate action. We're especially interested in hearing from him about programs that demonstrate measurable greenhouse gas emissions reductions. If you go to the Empower Our Future website events page, there is a link to a form where you can ask Mayor Brockett up to 3 questions. So hope you'll take a moment and head to our events page and get some questions for Mayor Brockett. I want to thank right now the really terrific Empower Our Future communications team. We have a larger group that helps figure out what kinds of programs we should present. And in particular, I want to thank Paul Coleman, Chris Hoffman, and Steve Whitaker, who are integral for in terms of making these events, these Empower Hours happen. I think I'll go ahead and do the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge with respect as non-native people that the land on which we stand, live, and learn is traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. We also recognize the 48 contemporary tribal nations that are historically tied to the lands that make up the state of Colorado. We honor elders past, present, and future, and those who have stewarded this land throughout generations. We also recognize that our government, academic, and cultural institutions and our nation itself were founded upon and continue to enact exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples. May this acknowledgement demonstrate a commitment to working to dismantle ongoing legacies of settler colonialism, oppression, and inequities, and to recognize the hundreds of Indigenous nations who continue to resist, live, create, and uphold their sacred relations across these lands. Let us seek to understand what it means to be in right relationship today with the traditional stewards of this land and with the land itself and with all creatures that inhabit it. I will introduce tonight's speaker, Katie Kienbaum, senior researcher at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance's Energy Democracy Initiative. She researches and writes about equitable and decentralized clean energy and its impact on communities across the country. Before joining the Energy Democracy Initiative, she was a research associate with the Community Broadband Networks Initiative. And when she's not doing the good work that she's doing at ILSR, Katie enjoys trail running. And she says slowly, and I'm guessing she was being modest. But without further ado, thank you, Katie. Take it over.
Thanks so much, Mary. So again, like Mary said, my name is Katie. I am a senior researcher at the Energy Democracy Initiative for the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. And I'm excited to talk a little bit more today about the Inflation Reduction Act and what it means for local clean energy and what it means specifically for Boulder and for Colorado. I'm going to talk a bit about so the general, the act, what it does, what types of programs it includes. Then I'll talk a little bit specifically about programs that households can apply for and benefit from, and then some programs that are more at the community level that cities or community organizations can participate in. So just a little background on the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. We are a national research and policy organization that works to build strong local economies while challenging concentrated corporate, political, and economic control. We do this across a variety of initiative areas, including the Energy Democracy Initiative, which I'm a part of. We also have initiatives that focus on things like independent businesses, community broadband, composting, the whole range of things. At the Energy Democracy Initiative specifically, we work to empower communities to pursue 100% clean energy with tools and policy analysis and technical assistance, while also challenging the control of corporate utility monopolies. And you'll see on this slide here, I just added a screenshot of our website and our page on our website, and it just shows a little sampling of some of the different resources and tools that we have on there. So our big focus, like I said, at the Energy Democracy Initiative is equitable local clean energy and supporting access of that for communities of equitable local clean energy. We focus on this for a variety of reasons, mainly because we believe that it has a big impact and a big potential for communities. This includes through the savings that households can experience on their energy bills. It can create good green jobs. It can clean up our air and help us fight climate change. And it can also help us build local power and local control in our communities. And our focus on this equitable clean energy, local clean energy, is why I've been researching and following the Inflation Reduction Act, and why I hope that some of you will be excited about the Inflation Reduction Act as well. It's this giant piece of legislation that passed earlier this summer. It includes a lot of different policies and programs, but it largely addresses three main issue areas, and that is tax policy, healthcare, and then what I'm actually going to focus on and talk about today, and that's climate and energy investments. And that is a historic investment, about $370 billion worth of investment in climate and energy programs. Most of that is in the form of incentives and funding programs for clean energy development. This is largely a lot of carrots, not as many sticks. It's largely working to incentivize folks to go clean versus, excuse me, sorry, I got a little trigger happy with my fingers there. As I was saying, it's mainly focuses on carrots and incentives for folks to adopt clean energy and deploy clean energy. And you'll see there on the slide, I have some estimates for some of the impacts for some of these benefits that I was talking about as being important, including emissions reductions, job creation, and also energy bill savings. In general, one way that I've been thinking about the Inflation Reduction Act is that it's going to, or at least the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act, is that it's going to help boost some existing clean energy trends. It's going to help us lower the costs of clean energy for households through things like tax credits, but also through investments in manufacturing. There are programs that are going to help us expand access to more households for clean energy, including lower income households. And there's also programs that are going to make our homes and our buildings and all of our vehicles easier to run off clean energy as we electrify more and more of those things. It's not on this slide, but it also, in a lot of ways, does kind of continue this this growing focus in the advocacy community and in communities on having this locally controlled distributed energy, clean energy. We don't just want necessarily giant solar farms out in the desert. We also want to see solar on our neighbors' rooftops and on local farms and things like that. So that's also something that I see as a general benefit and impact of the Inflation Reduction Act. And so it'll achieve some of these things through mainly, like I said, basically throwing a lot of money at clean energy over the next decade through incentives, through financing programs for clean energy like solar energy and wind energy, geothermal, everything. There are some examples of sticks or other deterrents for those who might invest in dirty energy, including a methane fee, but a lot of what I'm going to talk today about and a lot of what is in the bill does fall into this incentives and funding category. And that includes things like grant and loan programs. It includes tax credits. It includes rebates. And I'm going to talk about examples of all these different types of policies. And I'm going to split it between talking about programs that households are eligible for and can benefit from. And then I'll talk about some things that are more available at the community scale level for maybe municipalities or utilities or community organizations, programs that they'll be able to take advantage of to invest in local clean energy. At the household level, families, taxpayers, individuals will be eligible for a variety of tax credits and rebates for things like renewable energy, energy efficiency improvements to their homes, electrification, electric vehicles, all that. And I'll spell some of those out in a second here. It's also worth noting that some of these more community scale investments in clean energy in things like equitable community solar can also help expand access to clean energy at the household level as well. But I'm going to talk more about those programs that enable those kinds of investments and those kinds of projects later on when I talk more about the community scale programs. So perhaps one of the largest household clean energy programs, or most notable, I should say, is the residential clean energy tax credit. This is an existing program that gives folks a tax credit for investing in things like rooftop solar panels. The Inflation Reduction Act will restore the credit to the full rate of 30%. So that's 30% of the investment that you make. And if 30% of the money you pay to put solar on your roof, you can get that back in the form of a tax credit. So as I said, the IRA will restore that credit value and also make it available for at least the next decade. And this is not just for solar panels, it also can be used for things like energy storage, or if you had geothermal at your home, or you installed small wind to power your home, those would also be eligible uses of this credit. And it's a good way for households to kind of take a chunk out of those high upfront costs that some of these investments have. Though there are some challenges with who can access the credit and who's able to use the credit. And I can talk more about that later if folks are interested. But regardless to say, it's a huge deal that this was restored and extended, making it available for the next decade. In addition to investments in clean energy like solar, there are also other incentives for households that just want to make their homes more efficient and make them more electric. This includes Tax credits for electric vehicles, that's a program that's part of the Inflation Reduction Act that I think has gotten a lot of airtime. There are some requirements baked into that in terms of which vehicles will be eligible, but that can be up to $7,500 for a new electric vehicle. There are also tax credits available for home upgrades like heat pumps, insulation and weatherization, having a home energy audit, and also making any upgrades you need to do to your home electric system to make sure that you can actually manage all of these new electric products in your home. And in addition, there's also rebates available as well. So unlike a tax credit, which just allows you, basically gives you a tax break or allows you to reduce the amount that you owe the federal government on your taxes. These rebates are going to be, money given directly to contractors or households right at the time that they're able to buy it. And so that's going to be the program is going to be available for similarly for efficiency and electrification upgrades in homes, potentially up to $14,000 total for low-income households, which is a huge sum. It's also very important to make sure that all households are, reaping the benefits of moving to things like electric stoves or induction stoves and are able to reduce air pollution in their home through that method. And it's also important to note that, these are all programs that are really incentives that are available at the household level. But that being said, there's still a role for, state government, local government involvement, for community groups to actually be promoting some of these programs and enabling some of these programs. Some programs, such as these rebates for low-income households, that's actually going to be something that the states are going to have to help design and run. So there's that direct level of involvement, but I think even at the local level, it's going to be, we're going to see the most impact from these different incentives and tax credits if we have local groups and local governments making sure that, their communities, their neighbors know that this is an option and that it's available and how to benefit from it and how to use it. So I just want to make that note there, since this is, it's easy to think like, oh, I live in an apartment and I can't, necessarily put solar on my roof, but maybe there is someone I know who has a house that I can tell them about this credit and that it's available again. There's just a couple other household programs I'll highlight here on the slide that are not quite tax credits or rebates or incentives, but will actually provide direct grant and loan funding that can be used to fund renewable energy or clean energy for folks in their homes or perhaps in their businesses. For instance, there's going to be $1 billion in loans available to make efficiency and renewable and resiliency upgrades to affordable housing. There's going to be $2 billion in loans and grants through the Rural Energy for America program to make loans and grants to rural businesses and to farmers to invest in clean energy. There's also funding to help electrify homes on tribal lands and to put zero emissions energy systems, i.e. most likely rooftop solar energy storage on their homes as well. And we can talk about any of these things that I've mentioned too more after I finish running through the rest of the slides. If it sounds like I'm just listing programs, I basically am. The legislation is very large. It just includes a lot of programs, policies. So I'm happy to dive into anything too in a little more detail if folks are interested. So at that community level, it's a lot of like I've been saying, it's a lot of carrots, a lot of incentives, a lot of funding programs. So institutions and groups like community nonprofits or electric utilities, solar developers, local and state governments, these folks will also be eligible, like households, for clean energy tax credits. And there are also a number of funding programs that they will be eligible for as well, included in the Inflation Reduction Act. Like households, as I said, other entities are also eligible for a tax credit for their clean energy investments in things like, maybe if you're a business and you put solar on your roof, you're eligible for a tax credit. Or if you're an electric utility and you build a solar farm, you'd be eligible for a tax credit. So they're also eligible for these tax credits. And these tax credits already did exist. So the Inflation Reduction Act is revamping the existing credits and extending them out through at least the next decade. The full base credit value will also be 30%, but there are some requirements tied up in that, which I'll get into in a second. The Inflation Reduction Act, however, doesn't just, take the existing set of tax credits and expand it for the next 10 years. It does make changes through things like requirements and bonus credits and other provisions tied up in these tax credits that we are hoping will increase equitable access to clean energy and really incentivize developers and groups and local governments to invest in equitable local clean energy projects as well. So I'm going to pop up to the slide before. So this 30% tax credit, that's only available if projects are under a megawatt or if they meet certain labor requirements. So if let's say Xcel Energy goes out and builds a big solar farm, they're only going to get that 30% tax credit if they actually, invest in making sure that the jobs that they are creating and hiring folks for are good jobs that offer prevailing wages and offer advancement opportunities. Similarly, if a community group wants to build a smaller community solar farm to serve, their neighborhood, it's going to be easier they get that 30% tax credit as long as they stay under 1 megawatt. So it does incentivize these smaller projects as well. There's also bonus credits for projects that are built with domestic content, that are located in communities that have had, for instance, power plants shut down or mines shut down. Bonus credits for projects that are located in low-income communities or that serve low-income households. And these bonus credits are all actually stackable too. So you can envision if you had a community solar developer that built a small 250 kilowatt project, they would get the 30% base credit that they start out with. And then if they include domestic content, maybe they can get the other 10% for 40%. If they include, if it's built in a community that recently lost a coal power plant, maybe that's another 10%. And maybe if the electricity serves low-income households, a majority of low-income households, that could be, up to 70% in theory, that some of these projects could get. And it is really focused on getting these credits and incentivizing these, more favorable projects, projects that ideally will have a more impact and benefits for communities. One of the changes that I think ILSR and other advocates have been most excited about is that the Inflation Reduction Act also institutes what's known as direct pay for certain tax exempt entities that will enable them to access the credit where they hadn't been able to before. Since it is a tax credit, structured as a tax credit, it's only historically has only been available to entities that owe taxes to the federal government. So local governments, schools, nonprofit community groups, community choice aggregators, rural electric cooperatives, they haven't been able to actually benefit from the tax credit like, for instance, large electric utilities have been able to. So this provision, this direct pay provision, will actually, instead of having it to have to offset federal taxes that they owe, it will be available as a payment to these other entities. So that allows them to actually monetize and use the credit and kind of just get on an equal footing with the big utilities, big developers that are already able to use this credit. And this is obviously like a big deal for municipal electric utilities and rural electric cooperatives. But I think even in places like Boulder that are served by an investor-owned opportunity, there's still a lot of opportunity here for potentially community solar developers to take advantage of some of these bonus credits that reward these more equitable projects, and to try to figure out how to make a project happen that way, or maybe for community groups or faith communities to think creatively about how they can invest in something like solar or maybe even geothermal for their properties, and potentially do something like build a resiliency hub for their community. Things like that, or just save money on their energy bill so they can reinvest in the programs that they're actually designed to offer. So I think there is still, with this direct pay provision especially, and with all these bonus credits that incentivize certain types of project development, there is a lot of opportunity here. Even if you have an investor-owned utility or a utility that isn't necessarily investing in projects to benefit the community. And there are, in addition to the tax credits for clean energy investments, there's also just a variety of loan and grant programs that are going to be available for municipalities and community groups and states to tap into and to use to help fund clean energy development. So this includes, one of my favorites is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. A lot of people have been talking about this as kind of like a national green bank. It will offer $27 billion total in funding opportunities. This includes $7 billion for grants to states, localities, green banks for funding zero emissions energy systems in low income and disadvantaged communities specifically. So this includes things like funding rooftop solar panels, which is just a really great way to bring some of those benefits I was talking about earlier, like bill savings to the household level. The remainder of that will be what we kind of think of traditionally as like green bank financing, where it will provide the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is under the EPA, will provide grants to green banks across the country to provide financing and technical assistance for activities and projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that could be, anything like, helping finance loans for households that want to buy maybe a heat pump, maybe helping finance community solar developers that are trying to build a project to serve low-income households, things like that. It's a huge investment, and about 40% of that general funding is going to be reserved for low-income and disadvantaged communities, or projects that benefit low-income and disadvantaged communities. So that has like that has a huge potential there to really make a difference in a lot of folks' lives. And is also something that can be taken advantage of at the local level and at the state level. I do believe, I'm not very familiar with it, but I do believe that Colorado has a green bank. So there's going to be opportunity there. And I know a lot of states and regions are talking about, setting up their own green banks and green financing institutions to be able to take advantage of this wave of funding. Also highlight the climate environmental justice block grants. Community groups and also local governments in partnership with community groups will also be eligible for these block grants, and they're going to be available to fund a variety of different types of projects. Anything from trying to mitigate the effects of urban heat islands, to investing in clean energy technologies, to investing in climate resiliency, a whole range of opportunities there as well. And is also, like I said, something that communities and cities can take advantage of locally and can, make sure that they're searching that out. So, all of these programs I listed, everything that's included in the Inflation Reduction Act, it is still a first step, even if it is a historic amount of investment. The tax credits, which we'll talk a little bit more about, they're not accessible to low-income families that don't have a lot of tax liability, that just don't owe a lot of taxes. There's still a lot of need to make sure that these investments are meeting Justice 40 commitments, which, the commitment is that 40% of federal investments will benefit disadvantaged communities. Some of these programs explicitly carve that out in the legislation. A lot don't, and we need to make sure that when it's implemented, we're focusing that implementation to be able to really direct those benefits to communities that need them the most and deserve them the most in a lot of ways too. And there's also, I think, folks in Boulder, you're very familiar with the need for having local control over your electric monopoly that serves you, or utility monopoly that serves you, and being able to actually, have more influence over where the energy that you get comes from. So that is all I have today in terms of a slide presentation, if there it goes. So thank you so much for listening. I know that was a lot. So I'm very happy to take any questions and hop back into anything that folks want me to cover a little bit more in depth, or talk about a little bit more with some more details. I am going to keep this presentation up for a second so I can answer Paul's question really quickly. About the tax credits. So largely, so for if you, with the tax credits for something like rooftop solar, that takes effect this year, actually. So if you put solar on your roof this year, you may have been expecting to get a 26% tax credit. The Inflation Reduction Act actually puts that into effect this year. So you'll actually now get a 30% tax credit. Continuing forward, it'll be that percentage. And then as for a lot of these other newer programs, a lot of them do take effect next year. I believe the new EV tax credits will take effect next year. A lot of these other things like efficiency rebates, those will have to wait for federal agencies and state agencies to actually develop the guidelines and the programs. So some of these things will take a little bit to implement in that way too. And thank you again for your time today so far.
Well, thank you, Katie. Huge amount of information.
So one question from Jan Peterson is the $9 billion for rural electric associations in addition to all of the other specific programs you mentioned? If so, what kind of restrictions would apply? That is an addition. It's going to be, I I believe, in the form of loans and potentially also grants through the U.S. Department of Agriculture for rural electric cooperatives to invest in things like clean energy and to transition to clean energy. I'm not sure of a lot. I can pull up the details really quickly. That's one of the programs I'm slightly less familiar with, but I do think that's also an example of one of the programs that it's going to take a little time to develop, for the federal agency, in this case USDA, to actually develop some of the guidelines for what it's going to be able to do. So I that one might be we'll have to wait and see exactly, but that is an additional nearly 10 billion. It's 9.7 billion that's going to be available for rural electric cooperatives for clean energy investments. Then there's this question from Leslie. What about the chances for the Manchin fossil fuel bill? That was part of the IRA deal, and what are the chances of stopping it? I'm assuming this is talking, so I guess I'll answer all parts of what it could potentially mean. So there was one of the shortcomings and real disappointments in the Inflation Reduction Act were some provisions around fossil fuel leasing that Manchin basically got added in before he would agree to it. So that's specifically, it were some specific areas in the Gulf and in Alaska that are the leasing was reopened on them, basically. That's a simplification, but hope you'll bear with me. And it also tied future leases for clean energy and on federal lands to having leasing areas open for fossil fuel investment as well. So that's one part that was in the legislation that passed, and that is now law, unfortunately. The part that I think that they're asking about is actually there's what's been reported and what's understood is that Manchin also got an agreement from Senator Schumer and congressional leadership that they would pass a bill to enable permitting changes that could help fast track certain fossil fuel projects, including his personal favorite, which is the Mountain Valley Pipeline that goes through West Virginia and Virginia, which is a natural gas pipeline. So that piece of legislation hasn't passed yet. That's a future question. There are a lot of advocates that are doing a lot of work to try and prevent that from passing and to try to stop that. I think there's definitely a chance. I don't know if I could say for certain one way or the other, but obviously we've already passed the Inflation Reduction Act, so there isn't that anchor kind of tying all of the Senate and House Democrats to trying to work on this bill that Manchin wants to pass. So I think there is definitely an opportunity, although my assumption is that leadership is going to be pushing for it hard. And leadership, I mean leadership in Congress for the Democrats. So I think it's a toss-up. Is the long answer short. And then income test for tax credits. Is there an income tax for test for tax credits? There are some requirements on certain tax credits. So if you wanted to, this residential clean energy tax credit, that does not have, so this would be if you wanted to install solar panels or a battery storage in your home, that has no income tax test for the tax credit. All homeowners and taxpayers will be eligible for that. For electric vehicles, there is a income test to be eligible for that one. And I think it's about for the new vehicle tax credit. I believe it's 300,000 if you have a married couple in terms of income, and 150,000 if you're single, and then somewhere in between, maybe 225 if you are head of household. For annual income, you have to be below those limits to qualify for the electric vehicle tax credits. And then the income limits are lower as well for the used electric vehicle tax credits. And then some of these other things, like I mentioned, the efficiency and electrification rebates for low-income households, those are obviously limited to like low and moderate income households. And that'll be to folks that are under 150% of, I believe, the area median income. So that varies depending on what your local incomes are like. So it kind of depends on the credit. There are things available like the efficiency tax credits if you wanted to install a solar if you wanted to install a heat pump, those are also not income limited. It is mainly some of these specific rebate programs and the electric vehicle tax credits. Those are, I think, the two main ones I would say are income limited. And then also a question about the domestic content requirements for EVs and their relationship to the tax credits. So this is one I'll admit I don't focus very much on electric vehicles. So I have probably a basic understanding of this one, but could definitely, send you some more information if you'd like to follow up after. Or point you to some more information. But the gist of it is that only vehicles that meet certain domestic content requirements will be eligible for the credit. So that is, I'm not sure I actually have the number pulled out anywhere, so I might have to just put a pin in it for a second. But it is, I do think it changes and increases over time. And I do think that there is going to be a lot of instances, and also just with how manufacturing can change, there is going to be vehicles that are, eligible for the credit one year, not eligible for the credit next year, and some variation in that. And I do know that a lot of groups have been, tracking that and releasing like preliminary lists of the vehicles that they think are going to be eligible for the tax credit. So it is going to be something that's a little like trickier to track and a little more detailed. It is worth noting that previously the electric vehicle tax credit that we had before had a cap on how many vehicles different manufacturers could sell before they were no longer eligible for those vehicles were no longer eligible for the credit. So that had, Tesla, for example, has already hit that cap. Vehicles that Tesla makes, if they meet these domestic content and other requirements, those are going to be eligible again. But I can perhaps share with Empower Our Future folks or Mary or someone some good links to lists of vehicles that would be eligible and some of the analysis around that after this for folks for future reference.
Great. Katie, before you leave that topic, I'm just curious, and maybe other people don't know, the domestic content, is that safe to assume that they're trying to have more components of a vehicle made in the USA? Is that encouraging manufacturing here? Is that the reasoning?
That is extending past the reach of my knowledge exactly. I'm going to be honest, I just don't focus a lot on electric vehicles, so I kind of gave that a cursory glance and looked past it. I believe it is it's either and or has to do with the actual content. I think there's some of it has to do with the actual content in the vehicles and like in the batteries, and then some of it I think also has to do with whether or not it's assembled in the United States or perhaps North America. It might also be that. So I apologize for my lack of knowledge on that one.
No problem. And I'm guessing there may actually even be people on this call who have some details.
Yeah, I hope so. Please put it into the Q&A. We'll read it out.
Totally
because that is not my expertise, I will admit.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for bearing with me on that one. I do actually probably have a better answer for this question about the details of domestic content for PV projects and storage. So that is not a requirement for either the residential or these the more commercial scale solar credits. So you don't have that. There's no requirement around that to be able to access the credit. For like businesses, utilities, other more commercial institutions, or also rural electric cooperatives, local governments, community groups, the like, there is a bonus credit available for projects that include domestic content, and that is a up to it depends on what the base credit value is. So if you meet those labor requirements or the size requirements, and what your base credit value is, but it can be up to 10% additional credit. So if you're getting a 30% credit and you meet the domestic content requirements, that can be a total of 40%. And those requirements are on things like, I believe, the steel and, sorry, I'm scrolling through my notes. I do actually have notes on this one. Apologies. A lot of details to keep in mind. I am not a savant with those. I do believe the percentages change over time, though, is one of the things I would say. The percentage of, I believe it's steel and perhaps other materials do, I think, have to potentially change over time. And I can, again, follow up with some more details on that one after the fact. Touch on, okay, so I think a couple questions here. So touching on environmental justice community programs, and then I'll start with one question and then work through the rest, perhaps. So for environmental justice community programs, one specific program that comes to mind is the climate and environmental justice block grants that will be available. And those are specifically for, as I said, climate and environmental justice projects. So those will be targeted. Community groups will be able to access those block grants. And also like state and local governments will be able to as well if they partner with community groups on those projects. So that's one program in mind. Some other things just have requirements for part of the program investment to be spent in disadvantaged communities. So like the greenhouse gas reduction fund, that is going to require that some of the financing and grants available through that are benefiting low-income and disadvantaged communities. There are some other environmental justice programs also that I am less familiar with, just in the long list of programs that focus more on kind of environmental remediation and maybe climate resiliency. So those I'm just less familiar with, quite honestly, but there are some other programs in here as well that are not quite as focused on local, like clean energy investments, but on other things like pollution reduction in environmental justice communities as well. the new taxes that may be assigned to imported renewable energy projects to encourage domestic production. I'm not very familiar with that, or the emission reporting challenges. So I'm going to, unfortunately, I don't think I can answer those today, but I don't know if someone from Empower Our Future has anything to add on that. Otherwise, I can move on to the next question. Okay, so Minnesota's, I'm just going to read it out here. Minnesota's community solar garden program has at least 8 times as much community solar as in Colorado. Are you able to help the audience understand more about why Minnesota's program has been so successful, and any advice for how we get our investor-owned utilities like Xcel to allow more community solar gardens in Colorado, instead of keeping a strong thumb on the amount of solar gardens in Colorado? Yeah, so I do wish my colleague Maria McCoy was here to answer that, because she is focuses a lot more on the community solar aspect of our work than I do. I do think it is interesting, right? Of course, because we're served as well by Xcel here in Minnesota. So there, you would assume there are, obviously they don't, the different portions of the utility don't operate the same in both states, but it is true that Colorado is much farther behind Minnesota in terms of just the actual capacity, but we have a national program tracker that my colleague Maria McCoy puts together. So if you are able to get to that link, yeah, you can see what the question was asking about. There's a lot more community solar development in Minnesota, just a lot more megawatts basically than in Colorado. The Colorado program does have a, I think, a program cap that restricts how many megawatts is able to be produced under the program, which the Minnesota program does not. So I think that's one aspect of it. The question of how to influence Xcel is another question. You know, a lot of this is set at, I'm assuming this is true in Colorado as well, a lot of it's set at the State Utilities Commission or the Public Service Commission. I'm not sure what it's called in Colorado, but it is a question of engaging sometimes in those regulatory proceedings and influencing it that way, which can be difficult because utilities do have just such deeper pockets and, you know, much more money to pay for experts to help them in those, you know, oftentimes very detailed and complex proceedings. But that's generally the path forward through changing that. And I don't know if I can offer much more insight than that. But would be happy again to follow up afterwards with any additional community solar resources that we have for ILSR. I can pass it over to Mary.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you so much, Katie. It's a huge amount of information that you are more than familiar with, and we really appreciate your being here. And it looks like, yeah, no more questions. We won't necessarily go any longer, but again, thank you so much. I want to also remind folks to go to the Empower Our Future website. The events page has a link where you can ask Mayor Brockett questions about climate and energy, and we'll hear from him again. That'll be in October. October 11th is a Tuesday, 6 o'clock. But I'll look forward to communicating with Katie and getting some additional resources and posting them on the Empower Our Future website. But again, thank you so much, Katie. Really appreciate your time and expertise.
Thanks for having me here. Happy to be here and looking forward to following up with some more information on the questions I couldn't answer.
Great. Again, no problem. And we appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who was here in attendance. Appreciate it.